Book 2, Chapter 41 of Resurrection. The carriage in which Nekhludoff had taken his place was half filled with people. There were in it servants, working men, factory hands, butchers, Jews, shopmen, workmen's wives, a soldier, two ladies, a young one and an old one, with bracelets on her arm, and a severe-looking gentleman with a cockade on his black cap. All these people were sitting quietly. The bustle of taking their places was long over. Some sat cracking and eating sunflower seeds, some smoking, some talking. Taras sat, looking very happy, opposite the door, keeping a place for Nekhludoff, and carrying on an animated conversation with a man in a cloth coat who sat opposite to him, and who was, as Nekhludoff afterwards found out, a gardener going to a new situation. Before reaching the place where Taras sat, Nekhludoff stopped between the seats, near a reverend-looking old man with a white beard and nankeen coat, who was talking with a young woman in peasant dress. A little girl of about 7, dressed in a new peasant costume, sat, her little legs dangling above the floor, by the side of the women, and kept cracking seeds. The old man turned round, and, seeing Nekhludoff, he moved the lappets of his coat off the varnished seat next to him, and said, in a friendly manner, "Please, here's a seat." Nekhludoff thanked him and took the seat. As soon as he was seated, the woman continued the interrupted conversation. She was returning to her village, and related how her husband, whom she had been visiting, had received her in town. "I was there during the carnival, and now, by the Lord's help, I've been again," she said. "Then, God willing, at Christmas I'll go again." "That's right," said the old man, with a look at Nekhludoff. "It's the best way to go and see him, else a young man can easily go to the bad, living in a town." "Oh no, sir, mine is not such a man. No nonsense of any kind about him. His life is as good as a young maiden's. The money he earns he sends home, all to a kopeck. And as to our girl here, he was so glad to see her. There were no words for it," said the woman, and smiled. The little girl, who sat cracking her seeds and spitting out the shells, listened to her mother's words, and, as if to confirm them, looked up with calm, intelligent eyes into Nekhludoff's and the old man's faces. "Well, if he's good, that's better still," said the old man. "And none of that sort of thing?" he added, with a look at a couple, evidently factory hands, who sat at the other side of the carriage. The husband, with his head thrown back, was pouring vodka down his throat out of a bottle, and the wife sat holding a bag, out of which they had taken the bottle, and watched him intently. "No, mine neither drinks nor smokes," said the woman, who was conversing with the old man, glad of the opportunity of praising her husband once more. "No, sir, the earth does not hold many such," and, turning to Nekhludoff, she added, "That's the sort of man he is." "What could be better?" said the old man, looking at the factory worker, who had had his drink and had passed the bottle to his wife. The wife laughed, shook her head, and also raised the bottle to her lips. Noticing Nekhludoff's and the old man's look directed towards them, the factory worker addressed the former. "What is it, sir, that we are drinking?" "Ah, no one sees how we work, but every one sees how we drink. I have earned it, and I am drinking, and treating my wife and no one else." "Yes, yes," said Nekhludoff, not knowing what to say. "True, sir. My wife is a steady woman. I am satisfied with my wife, because she can feel for me. Is it right what I'm saying, Mavra?" "There you are, take it. I don't want any more," said the wife, returning the bottle to him. "And what are you jawing for like that?" she added. "There now, she's good, that good, and suddenly she'll begin squeaking like a wheel that's not greased. Mavra, is it right what I'm saying?" Mavra laughed and moved her hand with a tipsy gesture. "Oh my, he's at it again. There now, she's that good, that good. But let her get her tail over the reins, and you can't think what she'll be up to. Is it right what I'm saying?" "You must excuse me, sir. I've had a drop." "What's to be done?" said the factory worker, and, preparing to go to sleep, put his head in his wife's lap. Nekhludoff sat a while with the old man, who told him all about himself. The old man was a stove builder, who had been working for 53 years, and had built so many stoves that he had lost count, and now he wanted to rest, but had no time. He had been to town and found employment for the young ones, and was now going to the country to see the people at home. After hearing the old man's story, Nekhludoff went to the place that Taras was keeping for him. "It's all right, sir. Sit down, we'll put the bag here," said the gardener, who sat opposite Taras, in a friendly tone, looking up into Nekhludoff's face. "Rather a tight fit, but no matter since we are friends," said Taras, smiling and lifting the bag, which weighed more than 5 stone. As if it were a feather, he carried it across to the window. "Plenty of room. Besides, we might stand up a bit, and even under the seat it's as comfortable as you could wish. What's the good of humbugging?" he said, beaming with friendliness and kindness. Taras spoke of himself as being unable to utter a word when quite sober, but drink, he said, helped him to find the right words, and then he could express everything. And in reality, when he was sober, Taras kept silent. But when he had been drinking, which happened rarely, and only on special occasions, he became very pleasantly talkative. Then he spoke a great deal, spoke well, and very simply and truthfully, and especially with great kindliness, which shone in his gentle blue eyes and in the friendly smile that never left his lips. He was in such a state today, Nekhludoff's approach interrupted the conversation. But when he had put the bag in its place, Taras sat down again, and with his strong hands folded in his lap, and looking straight into the gardener's face, continued his story. He was telling his new acquaintance about his wife, and giving every detail. What she was being sent to Siberia for, and why he was now following her. Nekhludoff had never heard a detailed account of this affair, and so he listened with interest. When he came up, the story had reached the point where the attempt to poison was already an accomplished fact, and the family had discovered that it was Theodosia's doing. "It's about my troubles that I'm talking," said Taras, addressing Nekhludoff with cordial friendliness. "I have chanced to come across such a hearty man, and we've got into conversation, and I'm telling him all." "I see," said Nekhludoff. "Well then, in this way, my friend, the business became known. Mother, she takes that cake. 'I am going,' she says, 'to the police officer.' My father is a just old man. 'Wait, wife,' says he. The little woman is a mere child, and did not herself know what she was doing. We must have pity. She may come to her senses. But, dear me, mother would not hear of it. 'While we keep her here,' she says, 'she may destroy us all like cockroaches.' Well, friend, so she goes off for the police officer. He bounces in upon us at once, calls for witnesses." "Well, and you?" asked the gardener. "Well, I, you see, friend, roll about with a pain in my stomach and vomit. All my inside is turned inside out. I can't even speak. Well, so father, he goes and harnesses the mare, and puts Theodosia into the cart, and is off to the police station, and then to the magistrate's. And she, you know, just as she had done from the first, so also there, confesses all to the magistrate. Where she got the arsenic, and how she needed the cake. 'Why did you do it?' says he. 'Why,' says she, 'because he's hateful to me. I prefer Siberia to a life with him.' That's me, and Taras smiled. Well, so she confessed all. Then, naturally, the prison, and father returns alone. And harvest time just coming, and mother the only woman at home, and she no longer strong. So we think what we are to do. Could we not bail her out? So father went to see an official. No go. Then another. I think he went to 5 of them, and we thought of giving it up. Then we happened to come across a clerk. Such an artful one as you don't often find. You give me 5 roubles and I'll get her out, says he. We agreed to do it for 3. Well, and what do you think, friend? I went and pawned the linen she herself had woven, and gave him the money. As soon as he had written that paper, drawled out Taras, just as he was speaking of a shot being fired, we succeeded at once. I went to fetch her myself. Well, friend, so I got to town, put up the mare, took the paper, and went to the prison. What do you want? This is what I want, say I. You've got my wife here in prison. And have you got a paper? I gave him the paper. He gave it a look. Wait, says he. So I sat down on a bench. It was already past noon by the sun. An official comes out. You are Vagusov? I am. Well, you may take her. The gates opened, and they led her out in her own clothes, quite all right. Well, come along. Have you come on foot? No, I have a horse here. So I went and paid the ostler, and harnessed, put in all the hay that was left, and covered it with sacking for her to sit on. She got in and wrapped her shawl round her, and off we drove. She says nothing, and I say nothing. Just as we were coming up to the house, she says, And how's mother? Is she alive? Yes, she's alive. And father? Is he alive? Yes, he is. Forgive me, Taras, she says, for my folly. I did not myself know what I was doing. So I say, Words won't mend matters. I have forgiven you long ago. And I said no more. We got home, and she just fell at mother's feet. Mother says, The Lord will forgive you. And father said, How do you do? And, What's past is past. Live as best you can. Now, says he, is not the time for all that. There's the harvest to be gathered in down at Skorodino, he says. Down on the manured acre, by the Lord's help, the ground has borne such rye that the sickle can't tackle it. It's all interwoven and heavy, and has sunk beneath its weight. That must be reaped. You and Taras had better go and see to it tomorrow. Well, friend, from that moment she took to the work, and worked so that every one wondered. At that time we rented 3 desiatins, and by God's help we had a wonderful crop both of oats and rye. I mow and she binds the sheaves, and sometimes we both of us reap. I am good at work and not afraid of it, but she's better still at whatever she takes up. She's a smart woman, young and full of life, and as to work, friend, she'd grown that eager that I had to stop her. We get home, our fingers swollen, our arms aching, and she, instead of resting, rushes off to the barn to make binders for the sheaves for next day. Such a change. Well, and to you, was she kinder now? Asked the gardener. That's beyond question. She clings to me as if we were one soul. Whatever I think she understands. Even mother, angry as she was, could not help saying, It's as if our Theodosia had been transformed. She's quite a different woman now. We were once going to cart the sheaves with 2 carts. She and I were in the first, and I say, How could you think of doing that, Theodosia? And she says, How could I think of it? Just so. I did not wish to live with you. I thought I'd rather die than live with you. I say, And now? And she says, Now you're in my heart. Taras stopped and smiled joyfully, shook his head as if surprised. Hardly had we got the harvest home when I went to soak the hemp, and when I got home there was a summons. She must go to be tried, and we had forgotten all about the matter that she was to be tried for." "It can only be the evil one," said the gardener. "Could any man of himself think of destroying a living soul? We had a fellow once," and the gardener was about to commence his tale when the train began to stop. "It seems we are coming to a station," he said. "I'll go and have a drink." The conversation stopped, and Nekhludoff followed the gardener out of the carriage onto the wet platform of the station. End of Book 2, Chapter 41. Book 2, Chapter 42 of Resurrection. Before Nekhludoff got out, he had noticed in the station yard several elegant equipages, some with 3, some with 4 well-fed horses, with tinkling bells on their harness. When he stepped out on the wet, dark-coloured boards of the platform, he saw a group of people in front of the first-class carriage, among whom were conspicuous a stout lady with costly feathers on her hat and a waterproof, and a tall, thin-legged young man in a cycling suit. The young man had by his side an enormous, well-fed dog with a valuable collar. Behind them stood footmen, holding wraps and umbrellas, and a coachman who had also come to meet the train. On the whole of the group, from the fat lady down to the coachman who stood holding up his long coat, there lay the stamp of wealth and quiet self-assurance. A curious and servile crowd rapidly gathered round this group. The station-master in his red cap, a gendarme, a thin young lady in Russian costume, with beads round her neck, who made a point of seeing the trains come in all through the summer, a telegraph clerk, and passengers, men and women. In the young man with the dog, Nekhludoff recognized young Korchagin, a gymnasium student. The fat lady was the princess's sister, to whose estate the Korchagins were now moving. The guard, with his gold cord and shiny top-boots, opened the carriage door and stood holding it as a sign of deference, while Philip and a porter with a white apron carefully carried out the long-faced princess in her folding chair. The sisters greeted each other, and French sentences began flying about. Would the princess go in a closed or an open carriage? At last the procession started towards the exit. The lady's maid, with her curly fringe, parasol and leather case in the rear. Nekhludoff, not wishing to meet them and to have to take leave over again, stopped before he got to the door, waiting for the procession to pass. The princess, her son Missy, the doctor and the maid went out first. The old prince and his sister-in-law remained behind. Nekhludoff was too far to catch anything but a few disconnected French sentences of their conversation. One of the sentences uttered by the prince, as it often happens, for some unaccountable reason remained in his memory with all its intonations and the sound of the voice. "Oh, il est du vrai grand monde, du vrai grand monde," said the prince in his loud, self-assured tone, as he went out of the station with his sister-in-law, accompanied by the respectful guards and porters. At this moment, from behind the corner of the station, suddenly appeared a crowd of workmen in bark shoes, wearing sheepskin coats and carrying bags on their backs. The workmen went up to the nearest carriage with soft yet determined steps, and were about to get in, but were at once driven away by a guard. Without stopping, the workmen passed on, hurrying and jostling one another, to the next carriage and began getting in, catching their bags against the corners and door of the carriage, but another guard caught sight of them from the door of the station, and shouted at them severely. The workmen, who had already got in, hurried out again and went on, with the same soft and firm steps, still further towards Nekhludoff's carriage. A guard was again going to stop them, but Nekhludoff said there was plenty of room inside, and that they had better get in. They obeyed and got in, followed by Nekhludoff. The workmen were about to take their seats, when the gentleman with the cockade and the two ladies, looking at this attempt to settle in their carriage as a personal insult to themselves, indignantly protested and wanted to turn them out. The workmen, there were 20 of them, old men and quite young ones, all of them wearied, sunburnt, with haggard faces, began at once to move on through the carriage, catching the seats, the walls, and the doors with their bags. They evidently felt they had offended in some way, and seemed ready to go on indefinitely whenever they were ordered to go. "Where are you pushing to, you fiends? Sit down here," shouted another guard they met. "Voilà, encore des nouvelles!" exclaimed the younger of the two ladies, quite convinced that she would attract Nekhludoff's notice by her good French. The other lady with the bracelets kept sniffing and making faces, and remarked something about how pleasant it was to sit with smelly peasants. The workmen, who had felt the joy and calm experienced by people who have escaped some kind of danger, threw off their heavy bags with a movement of their shoulders and stowed them under the seats. The gardener had left his own seat to talk with Taras, and now went back, so that there were 2 unoccupied seats opposite and one next to Taras. 3 of the workmen took these seats, but when Nekhludoff came up to them, in his gentleman's clothing, they got so confused that they rose to go away, but Nekhludoff asked them to stay, and himself sat down on the arm of the seat, by the passage down the middle of the carriage. One of the workmen, a man of about 50, exchanged a surprised and even frightened look with the young man. That Nekhludoff, instead of scolding and driving them away, as was natural to a gentleman, should give up his seat to them, astonished and perplexed them. They even feared that this might have some evil result for them. However, they soon noticed that there was no underlying plot when they heard Nekhludoff talking quite simply with Taras, and they grew quiet and told one of the lads to sit down on his bag and give his seat to Nekhludoff. At first the elderly workman, who sat opposite Nekhludoff, shrank and drew back his legs for fear of touching the gentleman, but after a while he grew quite friendly, and in talking to him and Taras even slapped Nekhludoff on the knee when he wanted to draw special attention to what he was saying. He told them all about his position and his work in the peat bogs, whence he was now returning home. He had been working there for 2.5 months, and was bringing home his wages, which only came to 10 roubles, since part had been paid beforehand when he was hired. They worked, as he explained, up to their knees in water from sunrise to sunset, with 2 hours interval for dinner. Those who are not used to it find it hard, of course, he said, but when one's hardened it doesn't matter, if only the food is right. At first the food was bad. Later the people complained, and they got good food, and it was easy to work. Then he told them how, during 28 years he went out to work, and sent all his earnings home, first to his father, then to his eldest brother, and now to his nephew, who was at the head of the household. On himself he spent only 2 or 3 roubles out of the 50 or 60 he earned in a year, just for luxuries, tobacco and matches. "I'm a sinner. When tired I even drink a little vodka sometimes," he added with a guilty smile. Then he told them how the women did the work at home, and how the contractor had treated them to half a pail of vodka before they started today, how one of them had died, and another was returning home ill. The sick workman he was talking about was in a corner of the same carriage. He was a young lad, with a pale, sallow face and bluish lips. He was evidently tormented by intermittent fever. Nekhludoff went up to him, but the lad looked up with such a severe and suffering expression that Nekhludoff did not care to bother him with questions, but advised the elder man to give him quinine, and wrote down the name of the medicine. He wished to give him some money, but the old workman said he would pay for it himself. Well, much as I have travelled, I have never met such a gentleman before. Instead of punching your head, he actually gives up his place to you," said the old man to Taras. "It seems there are all sorts of gentlefolk too." "Yes, this is quite a new and different world," thought Nekhludoff, looking at these spare, sinewy limbs, coarse, home-made garments, and sunburnt, kindly, though weary-looking faces, and feeling himself surrounded on all sides with new people and the serious interests, joys, and sufferings of a life of labour. "Here is le vrai grand monde," thought Nekhludoff, remembering the words of Prince Korchagin, and all that idle, luxurious world to which the Korchagins belonged, with their petty, mean interests, and he felt the joy of a traveller on discovering a new, unknown, and beautiful world. End of Book 2, Chapter 42. End of Book 2 of Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Louise Maud.